Today on the Star Trek Critic, we acknowledge the passing of Gene Roddenberry. As usual, the Enterprise is diverted from its regular mission to talk to an admiral in person, claiming Zoom calls can't be trusted. Shout out to special effects for having a planet with clouds, but there is a line on the left of the screen, so -1 point. Picard arrives, claiming she needs to pay for the gas money. Admiral Brackett says, Picard, we have a horrible problem. The narrator is using an AI-generated voice, and that just pisses me off. Picard says, I feel your pain. My second officer has been using an AI-generated voice for years, and I can't stand it. Brackett says, the next thing the narrator is going to say is that this episode is called Unification because it is a two-parter unified into one long video. Picard says, that's stupid. The next thing you are going to say is that one of our most revered ambassadors has defected and been seen on Romulus, even though everyone knows their son is going to go Nova in 30 years and destroy the whole system. Admiral Brackett says, actually, Captain, that's exactly why I am here. Did you ever notice that the Star Trek credits look like the Superman movies? According to the stardate, about 1 day has passed. The whole purpose of this scene is for more opening credits and to show how nice Picard reflects on the table. Now some mushy father-son talk. Riker does Picard maneuver number 1. The first point is lost for opening credits 6 minutes into the show. When they leave, Riker says, maybe we can finally bill Spock for destroying our wall to just make his own movie. Now they arrive at Vulcan. It looks like their original mission was completely canceled. Picard should have paid a visit to Perrin in her own house on the surface instead of beaming her up and down, but that would mean spending more money on sets, so -1 point. Perrin says Spock was being a little brat and ran off like he always does. Picard wants to know who he might have gone to Romulus to see. She says he went to see the third baseman.
I don't know, he's third base!
Down in the cargo bay, Riker discovers Geordi is trying to build a spaceship he bought at IKEA. Riker says, this reminds me of a scene from the movie Millennium. Geordi says, damn, you must be really old to remember that movie. Riker and Geordi do Picard maneuver 2 and 3. Down on the surface, an excellent scene with Captain Picard and Sarek. Picard says, Sarek, check out my new shirt. Shout out to the late Mark Lenard for portraying an aging grandparent who is living on borrowed time. He is terribly upset that he was promised a trip to Paris for Star Trek VI, but he only had one line in front of a matte painting of the Eiffel Tower. Sarek says, I love you. Picard says, I know. Sarek wants to see the left fielder, then claims Pardek, a Romulan ambassador, is the first baseman, and that is the last you see of Sarek.
Aww.
Another day and a half has passed. As usual, an extra crosses whenever the doors open. Worf lets Picard know all the hard work he did to help Gowron was a waste of time. Data was able to get quite a bit of information about Pardek just by hacking that one camera. Picard says, he looks a lot like Commodore Mendez, who tried to have Spock court-martialed a long time ago. What if Mendez was an undercover Romulan? Worf managed to get a low-ranking Klingon online. Picard mentions he has been trying to contact Gowron for 3 days. That would mean he sent an email like minutes after he met with Admiral Braddock to match the stardate timeline. This junior adjutant is way down at the bottom of the Klingon Empire, but he is going to get a big boost today. He is the one who gets to threaten Gowron with a threat from Picard. That will make his day, I'm sure. Either he will move up in the Klingon Empire or be killed. You never can tell with them. The next point is lost since there are 1,000 people on the ship, some of whom specialize in fitting in with the local population, so the chief medical officer would not be making prosthetics, but she needed at least 5 lines in the show. Again, extras are always filmed first. Geordi gets in trouble since his Legos are all over the cargo bay, but he found the information they were looking for. They think the first baseman would want a Vulcan deflector. Will does Riker maneuver number 1. Worf says I number 1. Now they are in trouble with the Klingons. Normally I would take a point for a ship's captain going on a mission like this, but Picard mind melded with Sarek. The only point lost here is for Picard and Data still wearing Starfleet uniforms, since their entire trip will be undercover. Captain Kavada decides since he lost the draw in who takes the humans to Romulus to be killed for spying, he will make their lives as miserable as possible. He speaks to his crew in Klingon, but forgets that Picard and Data have universal translators and know he is trash-talking them. In reality, Klingon warriors have luxury accommodations aboard their ships, but Kavada decided he would put Picard and Data in one of their cargo bays as a joke. Kavada wants to know if he is really serious about this mission. Picard says, I certainly am. Kavada orders the crew to Romulus. His comments are Klingon for, damn, these humans are dumber than we thought. Ships in space would never maneuver like this, so -1 point. Only about 2 hours have passed since the last captain's log, so -1 point. Riker just realized with Picard off the ship, he is captain, so maybe his clucking like a mother hen all the time was a bad idea. The problem with Qualor II, This remote outpost would be impossible to defend against scavengers, so -1 point. Of course, the Zakdoran do think they are better than everyone else. That's why Klim Dakachin has such a stick up his ass, but does mention the third baseman was here. Riker is ready to just blast the guy. Worf says I number 2. Riker does Picard maneuver number 4. Riker says who does he think he is? Deanna says he looks like the guy from Schooner Tuna. Riker says Deanna, I think he has been out in space by himself too long. Maybe you will have a better chance. Deanna says that's sexist, and 1 point lost for wearing a catsuit. Look closely. That is a Klingon ship in the corner. And being sexist worked, he came right over. Klim sings his favorite Who song. On the screen it still says 4077 from the Half a Life episode. Klim wants to show Deanna his Kaldorian heel. What a pervert. While he flirts with Deanna, Riker shows off his butt. It turns out that scavengers have been taking things from the scrapyard all this time, including ships. Looks like the narrator was right as usual. Riker gets to say gotcha to Klim, then says we are going to catch them. Geordi says I number 3. And 4. In this episode, Data gets the best line.
I propose you take the shelf, sir.
The one thing I like about this scene is it reminds me of a comedic duo that entertained children for 50 years. Now, I don't know if Picard and Data were trying to do an Ernie and Bert sketch, but they nailed it. John Luke does Picard maneuver 5, 6, and 7 while Data looks on, claiming he is not looking at anything. As usual, anytime we hit 5, it is time for a drink. Sadly, Sarek has died at the age of 203. Look closely. Geordi does Picard maneuver number 8. The trap worked, and now the Zakdorns will have to answer to the Federation about how all these supplies have been stolen right under their noses. Geordi says I number 5. Worf says I number 6. Time for another drink. The ship fires. Riker does Picard maneuver number 9, since you should always have your uniform look good in a firefight. But the renegade ship is a little overstocked with ammunition, and ends up exploding on its own. Another point is lost on the Klingon ship, since they would have brought a support team with them that stayed on the Klingon ship to apply the prosthetics and monitor their movement on the surface. This scene is just for Picard to reflect he has to bring the bad news to Spock, who is currently 138. Kavada just realized laughing at them dressed like Romulans just made this trip worthwhile. Since Romulus is supposed to represent the Roman Empire, is that round building supposed to represent a Colosseum? The Romulans have great intel. They already know Picard is coming. They really don't have much of a plan except to hang around his office door like stalkers. And they should know not to go to the restaurant next door, since the owner spies on everybody stalking Pardek's door. The next point is lost since no one realizes they are speaking through the universal translator. And another point lost, since Picard and Data don't have a backstory to explain their presence. Just another reminder that if Starfleet is our first contact representatives of the future, Earth is in deep trouble. In less than 2 hours, Picard and Data are picked up. They blame the second baseman. As they go down the stairs, Data comments, "Hey, this looks just like the cavern we used to escape from the crystalline entity." Thankfully, Pardek knew Picard was coming, or else he would have ended up deported by Romulan ice. Of course, Pardek isn't really the good guy he claims to be. And the episode ends with the appearance of Ambassador Spock. Yes! Picard accuses Data of walking like an android. Data says, "Sorry, Captain." Picard says, "Don't call me Captain," or Shirley. The next point is lost for too much time spent on a recap from last week. Have you noticed that more and more TV shows with story arcs have longer recaps so the episodes are actually shorter? Spock says, "I'm a big kid, I can go where I want." Picard says you didn't put in your 2 weeks' notice and you still have to fill out your retirement paperwork. Picard says, "I love you." Spock says, "I know." The next point lost is unusual since it is caused by the future Star Trek movie with Chris Pine. The Romulus star is going nova in only 30 years. Their scientists would know that by now and should be evacuating the planet. Reunification must sound mind-boggling to Picard. He actually does bug Spock about his emotions quite a bit. Spock then says the only reason I am here is product placement for my movie that I produced and starred in, and they paid me $1 million. Picard says, "You suck, that's 10 times what I make, and you destroyed all my ships in the conference room." Another point lost for opening credits 6 minutes into the show. Data offers to share information on how to spy on the Romulans with the Klingons. Kavasa says, "Woohoo!" Then Data makes a horrible human mistake by saying piggyback. Data says he will attempt to penetrate. Kavada says, "Ew, androids are icky, no wonder the Romulans banned them. Either the flower is a way the underground communicates, or has a hidden microphone on it that they don't know about." or they actually stole the pen from the hotel. Spock is optimistic about reunification. Picard says it will take the destruction of this planet and 900 years for that to happen. Spock says, "You argue like my father. Titan is excited about Vulcan women." Pardek says you won't say that after you learn about that 7-year thing. Picard does his ambassadorial ass-kissing. Pardek tells Spock the proconsul wants to meet him. About 2 days have passed. Supposedly this is a bar on the surface of Qualor II. 1 point lost for the acting captain of the ship being off the ship. The producers still can't figure that one out. 1 point lost for Riker being in a bar in uniform. Amory is a welcome addition to the cast of Star Trek characters, and suck salt sounds nasty. Amory tells Riker her favorite Earth movie. It looks like the first baseman has already been here, and let them all know Riker was going to be looking for someone. 1 point lost for Riker not carrying any local currency, which is the first thing you will need when you are on a foreign planet trying to buy information. As usual, Earth of the future will have no original music, so Riker has to sell a 20th century jazz tune that won't get him a copyright claim. The sale works, and she tells him of Omag, the fat Ferengi. "You can't fool me, the camera is just sliding across from left to right. If you see a flower, you know it is a hidden microphone." In the proconsul's office, Nerl looks like a moron trying the Vulcan greeting. Spock is convinced Nerl is just some young politician trying to radicalize the unification idea into something that will get everyone killed. Although it is always great to see Denise Crosby, 1 point is lost for the character of Sela. She doesn't give me a warm fuzzy. The Unification Underground also thinks Nerl is full of it as well. Picard uses logic and emotions and a little bit of Sarek to argue with Spock. Spock says, "I fled to Romulus to get away from these human arguments." Spock admits he knows the Romulans are up to something, but believes he is in the right position to discover their trap even though it will probably get him killed. This computer has a Klingon logo. 1 point is lost for Data back in a Starfleet uniform. They really don't know how to dress undercover. Data and Spock have a logic fest. Data tells Spock his whole role in the new Star Trek show is to not be a Vulcan, then wants to know what it was like having a human sister who caused the Klingon War, and then gave one Klingon house a device that could destroy their entire planet in the name of peace. Spock says Star Trek Discovery is woke garbage, don't believe anything they say. 1 point is lost though, since there is no mention of Spock's wife. Perrin should have said something about that. Down on Qualor II, Worf finally gets to awe us with his beautiful singing voice, although the fat Ferengi says he sounds like a Barcadian pronghorn moose. Is that anything like a scruffy-looking nerf herder? Omar doesn't look fat, he looks pregnant, so who does Riker leave in charge of the Enterprise when he leaves? Now comes the battle of wits. Riker calls him the left fielder. Omag quotes his favorite Who song, then says he's not the Ferengi they are looking for, and only the first baseman would want a Vulcan ship. But it turns out Riker never learned to speak hypothetically, so decides to throw a Ferengi. I think that violates several Starfleet regulations. The next point is lost for Deanna in a catsuit, and 1 point since Deanna has less than 5 lines in this episode. Worf says I number 7. This little scene shows a Klingon weakness. They don't suspect anything in regular trade routes. The next point is lost for Picard and Data on the Romulan surface in Starfleet uniforms. That's just stupid. And now they are all under arrest for being illegal immigrants on Romulus. Sela acknowledges Data's prowess. Data says, "I had sex with your mom." Pardek says, "Who ratted us out?" Spock says, "You did." Pardek says, "No, that can't be." Spock says, "Yes. It all started when you tried to have me court-martialed for committing mutiny and taking the Enterprise to Talos 4. Then you posed as a Romulan senator for 80 years just for this moment." Pardek says, "Yep, that's exactly what I did." Then Sela says she is commandeering their reunification plan and going to conquer Vulcan. This is bad English. She should have said take them. At Galorndon Core they find nothing, but Picard sends a message to stay put, but Riker says that wasn't Picard, it was the second baseman. Geordi does Picard maneuver number 10, so it's time for a drink. The camera zooms in on the matte painting for dramatic effect. Data tries snarky humor with Sela. She didn't like it. Sela's plan will never work. Vulcan may be pacifist, but they are fully equipped to defend themselves, especially against 3 old warships. Sela is simply using this attack as a resume for her next promotion. I find it hard to believe she thought Spock would have read the speech. There must have been a breakdown in the Romulan plan somewhere, since they could have continued the facade of reunification to lead Spock on until the last minute. Spock says, "I'm not reading this garbage." Sela goes on a racist tirade against Vulcans. All of them are thinking, wow, Romulan holograms are way behind ours. There is no way the Romulan guards would leave them alone like that, so minus 1 more point. Riker does Picard maneuver number 11, 1 point lost for a boom mic reflection. At Warp 1, the ships would take years to get to Vulcan, so -1 point. Now the sun is setting on Romulus, so quite some time has passed. I would take a point for the Romulan hologram knowing what Riker looks like, but Data may have some computer connections. Beverly has less than 5 lines, so -1 point. And she should know this message is fake, -1 more point. Riker does Picard maneuver number 12. Then they think, wow, Romulan holograms are way behind ours. Data performs the Vulcan nerve pinch, and that is the last we see of Sela. Somehow I got the impression that the official Romulan government was never involved with this plan. They are better than this. And sadly, 2,000 Romulan troops are sacrificed. Worf says I number 8. The underground movement will either have to go deeper underground for fear of retaliation from the Romulan government, or the official Romulan government will befriend them to distance themselves from Sela and Neril. We never really find out. Spock says, Captain Picard, I will not be going with you. My reason for coming here has never been more clear. It's the narrator. He is using an AI-generated voice, and that just irritates me. Picard says, are you saying you would rather stay on a planet doomed to be destroyed in 30 years, where you will end up flying a jellyfish full of red goo, then dropped off on a frozen moon in another dimension just to see Vulcan destroyed, then listen to an AI-generated voice? Spock says yes, that's the most logical thing you said all day. Picard says, well, maybe you can help me with my headache. Sarek's memories have been bouncing around my head for 2 years and giving me migraines. Spock's like, that's what McCoy said. I can take care of that, and suck Sarek's memories out of Picard's head. That's why Picard is smiling at the end, because his headache is gone. Karen Hensel was Admiral Brackett. She will be back on Deep Space Nine and had a good run on The Young and the Restless. Joanna Miles was born in France. She has 80 screen credits, including Aloha Means Goodbye and The Incredible Hulk. Eric Avari was born in India and has 150 screen credits, including The Mummy and Stargate, Independence Day, and will be back on Enterprise. He really gets around. The late Mimi Cousins was a stage actress and 70 screen credits, including ER, Moonlighting, and The Golden Girls. Graham Jarvis had 140 screen credits, including Mary Hartman, The X-Files, and Seventh Heaven. Stephen Root has nearly 300 screen credits. Since he is really good at accents, he was on Office Space, Lower Decks, and anything that required a cartoon voice. Norman Large will be back on Next Gen, Deep Space Nine, and Voyager. Malachi Throne has 110 screen credits. He was in the Korean War. As well as the original voice of the Keeper in the Cage, you will also see him on Batman and Star Trek Phase 2. Harriet Leiter was Amory. She had 7 hands. Vidal Peterson was on Something Wicked This Way Comes. He will be back on Deep Space Nine. Billy Bastiani was Omag. Denise Crosby will be back for All Good Things, and Mark Lennard will be Sarek one last time on Star Trek VI. Leonard Nimoy will be back for the Kelvin movies. Unification, an excellent 2-parter featuring Spock, Sarek, Perrin, Sela, and the possibility of Vulcan and Romulus getting back together, gets a score of 71%. Thank you for viewing. Please leave comments below. Click the like button, the share button, and the subscribe button, and check out my other videos and playlist until next week for A Matter of Time.